Welcome back, y'all. Today is the 1st of October. This particular video is going to be watched in conjunction with the 13th of October. So that's going to take us up to Wednesday. That'll be a Wednesday, and that'll be, I think, the 8th week, the second part of the 8th week, part two of week 8 of the semester. And as I said, there's about 16 weeks of the term altogether. And two of those, well, no, 2.5 of those weeks will be dedicated exclusively to purposes of taking exams. So that leaves us with about 13 and a half weeks of substantive lecture materials. So you are rather, well, I guess all of us are over the hump, as it were. There's more behind us than there is ahead of us in terms of material. Now, that's not to say that there is more ahead of us than there is behind us in terms of points and opportunities to modify your score as it stands. So one of the things that I want to do today is I want to do a few things, and I have great expectations and great aspirations, and unfortunately, I have very little time because I really am going to make a meaningful effort to ensure that I don't take up any more time than I think is necessary. Whereas I know I've said that before, and I know you're probably tired of hearing me say that because I never actually commit to that, and it goes unvindicated. But today I'm going to make a solemn pledge. And look, what's good for you is good for me. It's good all around, right? Because it means that I have to spend less time standing in front of this video and doing this presentation, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but there are many things I could otherwise be doing, and I'm sure that's true for you as well. So I have to, I do want to discuss the test. Now, as I said, today is October 1st. Today is a Friday. I just got done grading those tests yesterday. Yesterday was a Thursday, obviously, the day before Friday, as it were. And I would have sent out an email. Okay, well, this is like Back to the Future again, because you guys, by the time you get around to actually viewing this, it will have been. I don't know whether or not you're going to actually watch this contemporaneous with the week that it is intended to be watched with, which is to say that you may watch it before October 13th, you may watch it at October 13th, you may not wait until after October 13th. I don't know, but I'm going to assume that you're going to watch it around or probably thereabouts. But by that time, 2 weeks will have already about it's 10 days, well, 11, 12 days, 12 days hence, right? And so that's not to say that this is irrelevant, therefore, but this is going to be just as prescient now as it will be then, because what I have to say about the exam is going to be instructive as it bears on your next test, which will be 2 weeks from, well, when you're listening to this video, it'll be 2 weeks from today. Because not today as in October 1st, but today as in if you actually watch this on October 13th, then it will be 2 weeks hence from October 13th, which will take us up to the 27th of October. Um, Now, I have received email correspondence from two of you so far, actually three of you, precisely three of you, in response to my solicitation for feedback and information and insight regarding what you actually want to do in terms of how this course ought to be structured going forward. I know that I committed ourselves, we collectively, not I unilaterally, but we collectively, and that's an interesting thing about this class, is that the decision that we made, and I say we, I don't really mean me, it's not inclusive of me. The decision that you all made was a decision that you made jointly and collaboratively and in furtherance of the common and collective interests of the group. And so, therefore, we are merely operationalizing and instrumentalizing and functionally applying the will of the majority as it was articulated and expressed in the survey that I had you guys submit to me. So, I am beholden to your interests as students. Now, if one or several of you come along and say that, well, actually, the YouTube paradigm is really inimical to my interest because I'm not properly able to assimilate this material for whatever reason, and you have some clear and lucid and coherent reasons that you need to articulate, then I'd like to hear those. And by all means, I will certainly entertain whatever you have to say. But at the end of the day, I really do think that the argument has to be looked at and evaluated. We have to look at and evaluate both sides of the equation. And it does seem to me that from a student standpoint, from the perspective of all you, what you ought to aspire to do is ensure that you are communicating to me your desire for a modality, a formatting of instruction that is maximally conducive to the furtherance of your academic interests. Now, if in fact YouTube is conceivably optimized for your academic success, because as one student actually very adroitly observed, and I think this is a point that I made before, but I think it's a very salient point, so I'll make it again. You can go back and you can listen to stuff, all right? Now, I'm not saying that there's an absolute categorical prohibition against people tape recording me in the session if we actually ever go back to class, which we may very well do. Because either way, I'm going to be back up to the UP at the end of October, so it's no trouble for me to get myself over to campus and actually physically get in the classroom. But as I said before, and I'll say it again, I don't see how being in the classroom lends much intrinsic value or educational merit or intellectual quality to the experience that we have. If you said that this is a course which lends itself to a highly dialectical sort of interactive exchange, then I would say, of course, it's incumbent upon me to ensure that I create an environment that is maximally conducive to the furtherance of those interests. Which is, i.e., to come to the classroom and to have that exchange and to have that engage in that sort of dialectical conversation, right? But that's not the kind of class this is so far, right? So far, right, the first 2 weeks were a pretty good indicator of what kind of class is going to be, which is me basically just, it's the Jeff Putz show, all right? And that's fine. It's not a problem. I don't have a problem with that, right? You guys could just sit back and listen and hopefully learn something along the way. That's fine, all right? That's no issues whatsoever, right? But I'm just saying, if that's what it's going to be, and that's what it was for the first 2 weeks, and yeah, there were a couple of you that said something, but you said something in response to my prodding and cajoling, right? It wasn't like, oh, I got to go out there and I got to just, of my own volition, I got to really assert myself and I got to have this particular conversation with this guy because this is really meaningful. No, it was in response to something that I asked some kind of query and some kind of question. You were responsive to that. Great. Okay. And if that's, like I said, if you want that, by all means, call me up, right? Shoot me don't shoot me a text, shoot me an email, okay? And I will certainly I will take under serious consideration whatever questions or concerns you have. So I don't think you're losing anything. I know I'm recapitulating these arguments, but I think they need to be heard again because some of you seem to have lost a sense of what tangible merits were associated with this. And see, the question you have to ask yourself is, not how good are you doing right now, okay? That's not the question, okay? The dispositive question, the only one that really matters is how much worse will you be doing if, in fact, we revert back to the physical classroom, right? Because it seems to me that the answer to that is, well, probably worse relative to how you're doing right now, because I actually think that you guys got the best of both worlds. And the reason I say that is because if this was an online class, first of all, you wouldn't be seeing me. I wouldn't be bothering to actually do these lectures, to do these video recordings. And I think some of you actually appreciate this. I know some of you do because you've actually told me this, right? And I'm not making this up. I swear to God, I can prove this. For those who are calling me out and saying, oh, no, you're just talking smack, Jeff, because you just don't want to get up in the morning. That's not really the case, okay? That's not the operative consideration. That's part of the calculus, obvious in the back of my mind. Yeah, I don't want to get up early, but that's not, that is not something that you ought to comprehend in evaluating how you want to go forward in this class, right? And I'm going to close escrow on this soon. I know you guys are tired of me talking about this stuff, right? But it needs to be talked about. So the question you have to ask yourself is what do I stand to lose? And it does seem to me that you guys do have the best of both worlds. The reason I say that is because if this were an online class, the only thing you would, well, what you would be doing is you'd be listening to lecture slides, okay? Not this video, right? Not interactive, not actually watching me, just hearing me, okay? Hearing my voice embedded in audio recordings that are situated in the PowerPoint slides around they're just interstitially along the way, okay? But what that class has to do, which is what you don't have to do, is they have what I refer to as busy work, because I think that sort of compensates for the fact that they're not actually a physical class, and therefore their exams are take home, and there's the same formatting as your exams. So I try to compensate, I try to make it a little bit more strenuous for them, out of consideration for the fact that their exams are very, very easy relative to a physical class, which this is technically still a physical class, even though you guys, as I say, you guys are getting it easy because you don't have to get up. I mean, that's not a big thing, right? But your exams are the easy type of exams, right? Because your exams are take home, as far as I'm concerned, right? You guys get 12 days or thereabouts, right, to get to the exam. That's a lot of time. It's a hell of a lot more time than an hour and 53 minutes, right? And you get unlimited resources, okay? How is that a bad deal, right? Because if we go back to the classroom, right, and this is not a threat, this is just the way it's going to work, okay? This is just how I conduct classes when we actually physically have classes, when we have a test in the confines of the physical class. You sit there and you have the time that we have associated with this class, 9 a.m. to 10:53 p.m. or 10:53 a.m. You have an hour and 53 minutes. That's it, okay? When that clock hits an hour 10:53, you're done. You have to turn the exam, right? You can't get it done in that time. You're shit out of luck, right? Because that's all the time you're getting. You're not getting any more. And even more dispositive than that, you don't have the availability of resources. You don't have accessibility to notes and to lectures. And to whatever materials, ancillary support materials you may think are probative in determining how you actually go about answering questions. So that is, to my mind, you guys have easy exams, right? Or easy formatting. I can't say the exams themselves are not going to change, right? The exams themselves, by the way, that test number 1 is exactly the same test that you guys would have gotten from me if in fact you were taking this physically, right? If in fact we were still in room 103, the chemistry room back there at the Copper County Center, you'd still be having the same test, right? It would still have the same level of intrinsic challenge associated with it. And it wouldn't be any easier. It wouldn't make it any harder, certainly, but it wouldn't be any easier, right? And I think that then the question is, well, think about the environmental parameters, right? Because if the test is the same test, right, what changes, right? What's different between this version of class versus the physical version of class? Well, the only thing that changes is you don't have very much time anymore, right? And you don't have any resources. You just have to rely upon your mind and your memory and your knowledge, right? Now, to my mind, that's actually more conducive of me actually inculcating in you the sorts of things that are associated with this course. But you guys know I don't care about memorization. I don't care about dates and facts and miscellaneous details. It doesn't concern me. And if it doesn't concern me, it certainly doesn't concern you. Okay? So therefore, it doesn't really make sense for me to create a testing environment which is structured in such a way so as to emphasize the premium or the primacy associated with inculcating in you certain facts. Okay, it's not a fact-intensive class. This is a methodological class, right? I teach you how to think, not what to think. Okay, and hopefully you guys are making some progress towards that, at least in the confines of the first exam, because I think that's what I try. Well, I know that's what I tried to do. Whether or not it actually happened, I can't say. So you guys are the best of both worlds because you have the easy format of tests, but you have none of the ancillary things, right? You don't have home. I give the other my online group, right, which you guys should be consider yourself blessed not to be in because you don't have the readings. All right, I do ask them to do readings. I don't really insist upon them, but nevertheless, I ask them to do readings. And I ask them to do weekly discussion sessions. All right, so they have to formulate posts. They have to contribute in a meaningful way, and that takes time, and that takes effort, and that takes thought. You guys don't have any of that, right? So one of the things I want to make, but again, before I actually delve into this exam, and I printed off one of your guys' exams. I'm not going to tell you whose this is. I don't want to embarrass anybody, but the person whose exam this is, this person did extremely well. This wasn't the 100%, right? Because there was a 100%, there was a 95, there was a 91, there was an 88, there was a 76, there was a 68, there was a 60, I think 60, and then there was, I'm not going to say what the failing grade was, but it was not good. So that was the distribution of the scores, okay? That's not bad, all right? And I said this in my email, but I'm going to say it again because it bears mentioning. I wasn't really ecstatic about those results. I wasn't really highly excited about that. I mean, I wasn't, but then again, I wasn't highly dissatisfied either. But then I suppose what you could say is it's kind of sort of a bifurcation. It's almost like I was very dissatisfied with the three of you who earned grades below the C level, and I was highly satisfied and very much pleased and encouraged to see that three of you at least, no, more than three of you earned A's. One of you earned what I consider to be an honorary A because he was almost in the A group, right? He only lost, the only reason he wasn't in the A group, the only reason he wasn't in the A group, the only reason the A's weren't higher A's was because the people, well, not all of them, because one of you guys got 100%, but most of you didn't actually follow the directions as I had stipulated them, and I can't understand why you didn't. Right? It's just a matter. What I'm really testing here is listening comprehension. Number one, most importantly, right? Listening comprehension. Are you paying attention to what I'm saying? All right? Are you assimilating that content? Whether you're writing notes, whether you're just taking track of it mentally in your mind, I don't care how you're doing it, just that you're doing it. Okay? So it's listening comprehension, but it's also reading comprehension, right? Ergo, I make certain stipulations in the content of the directions, and I say, make sure you don't modify the font or the document itself, right? Don't change the font. Some of you saw fit to change the font type and the size of the font. I don't know why you did that, right? You gave me a Word document, but you amended it. Why would you do that? I explicitly, very clearly, unambiguously stated, don't do that, okay? That was the language in the, I can read it right now for you guys. If I, all right, it says, use the font and type settings endemic to this document for your responses. Calibri type, see, and then even if you forgot what that was, I say, Calibri type, 11-point font, black font color. Do not reformat this document in any way aside from typing your answers to the questions, etc., 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 right? Now that, to my mind, is, as I say, very clear, unambiguous. There's no room for interpretation. Well, maybe that means I can change the type size to 10 or even 8 because one of you submitted one document, a Word document. We're still a Word document, right? Because some of you gave me PDF documents. I don't know why you did that, right? Maybe you don't know why you did that, okay? That's not what I'm asking for, right? And by the way, next time so 2 weeks from today, because the 27th of October is going to be exam number 2, at least so I aspire, so I hope we'll plan on that. Whether we're in the classroom or whether this is going to be an online take-home test, that's up to you guys. That's your prerogative. And maybe by the time you guys actually watch this, we will have decided that issue. But so far, I've got 2 to 1. All right, one of you people apparently wants me to revert back to either a physical class or do Zoom. Now, if you want to make that argument to me, that's fine, okay, right? But you gotta sell it, okay? Because it seems to me that the preponderance of evidence is on the other side of the house, all right, against that proposition. And what this person said to me, I'm not gonna say who this was, but this person didn't do particularly well on the test, and this individual basically asserted to me that they want either Zoom or they want a physical class, right? And that I'm somehow dispossessing them of that opportunity. Well, I think to myself, well, what opportunity, right? What is the surplus value as it's measured by sort of pedagogical indicia, right? The sorts of things that we ascribe to evaluating the intellectual quality of the experience. What is it you're missing when I'm talking to you via YouTube that you would have if, in fact, we were still in the classroom? That's one way of formulating the question. The other way is to say, well, if you see, because it seemed to me that the person was sort of insinuating that this somehow makes it challenging, right? This meaning, me down here in my basement recording lectures and putting them up on YouTube, like that makes it challenging. Interesting, because I wouldn't be doing anything differently if instead of being on YouTube, I'd be physically in front of you guys, right? There'd be no difference, okay? The only difference would be, well, you could ask me questions and there'd be a more dynamic dialectical exchange, right? But this person hadn't asked me any questions in class. I know who they are, and I know who the people are who actually have asked me questions. This wasn't one of them. So it just seems to me that if you want to make that case, because it's like, here's the analogy, right? I'm asking you guys to go and learn how to do cross-country skiing, right? You know how cross-country skiing goes? It's the Nordic stuff. It's the stuff they do up there in Finland. You guys should know that your ancestors used to do it, right? Finland and Scandinavia. And they got the poles, right? And they do this, and it's pretty easy. I mean, it's good cardiovascular workout, but it doesn't require a lot of technique, not a lot of subtlety or nuance to it, right? You just get on your skis and you just do a little bit of this, right? That's cross-country skiing, right? So you're doing cross-country skiing, right? You're doing the academic equivalent of cross-country skiing. And this person, and maybe some of you are thinking the same thing, you're saying, oh, no, I'm tired. I don't like cross-country skiing, right? And the reason I don't like it is because I don't do very well with cross-country skiing. So let's change it so that we're actually doing downhill skiing instead. Now, that seems to me to be rather ridiculous, right? Because you're saying the thing that's easy, I don't like it because it's not easy enough. So let's do this thing that is intrinsically much more challenging because it involves technique. It involves a lot more effort. It involves more concentration. It involves more focus and expertise, right? And so let's go ahead and change it to that, right? Now, I dare say, for those of you who did not do well in this test, okay, you're not doing certain things that I have recommended to you that you do, okay? I know this. Okay, I can say this with absolute certitude and absolute clarity. And you're going to call me out and say, how do you know, Jeff? You can't read minds. You've already proven you can't read minds, right? But I know for a fact, because I know on the other side of the equation, there are certain of you who did extraordinarily well on this first exam. Now, I have to assume that you are similarly situated to those people, right? There's no fundamental difference between you guys, right? I mean, you're all college students. You all have the same background, same kind of experience. I mean, there's one of you that in this class that is I wouldn't say more comparable to me in age. She certainly doesn't look it, but she's more mature, right? Maybe she has more experience than the rest of you guys, but I don't think that's really probative. I think so. I'm going to go through and I'm going to tell you what you ought to be doing, right? And for those of you who got A's and the honorary E, the A, the very high B, and honestly, even the C person, because I know that person is very, very smart, and I know that person can do much better. But the 2 D's and the F's need to really pay attention here, okay? The rest of you, I don't want to say just forget about what I'm saying, because you're not going to know when I stop talking about this unless you turn the words, the captioning. But I don't think YouTube has captioning function because I didn't do that for this video. But I do want to take some time, and I do want to go through this exam just very, very briefly, because I think some of you are just missing the point altogether. Okay, and what you say, Jeff? How do I gain success in your class? How do I gain? Well, think about it this way. What does this class fundamentally come down to? I'm not asking you to do really anything. Okay, I'm only asking you to do one thing, and that's it. It's the exams, right? Take the exams. That's all I'm asking you to do. Now, of course, there are things that you should be doing incidental to, in anticipation of and preparation for, preparatory for those exams, i.e., listening to the lectures, i.e., taking notes I do recommend that, all right? Maybe some of you just have a sort of frivolous, disingenuous attitude towards all this because it's just YouTube video. I don't know. I can't know, okay? Maybe you're not taking notes. Maybe you don't care because you don't think it's important. Maybe you're not taking me seriously. I don't know, right? But I'm telling you, and I've told you before, but I'm going to tell you again because some of you obviously aren't doing this. If you take notes, and they're good notes, and they are a representative sample of the most salient, most critical elements of these lectures, then it makes it so much easier for you. And you have a chronological adumbration of precisely what I talked about and when I talked about it. And all you got to do, and by the way, I sequence the questions on these exams. They are sequenced, for God's sakes. You guys see that? I mean, I try to make this as easy as I do. I really do, okay? Number one, I'm talking about primary and secondary sources, for God's sakes. That was the first thing I talked about on the very first day of the very first week of this class, okay? And then I go and I talk about number two, and that talked about why should we study history, right? What's the intrinsic value of it, right? How do we reflect upon the changing cultural values, and how do those values modulate the ways we interpret the past, right? That was from day two, or week one, part two. That was from Wednesday, okay? And then the next question happened to do with the next week, right? That was week two, part one, right? And then the fourth question was week two, part two. I swear to God, all right? That's how I structured this. And if you don't believe me, go and look more closely and then reconcile this stuff with the chronological sequence of the notes as they relate to the first 2 weeks of class. And the same holds true for the rest of this exam, right? It is sequential, it is chronological, it is in precise chronological sequence, okay? You can't say that it's not, because it is. And I know because I'm the one who wrote it, right? Now, what I'm saying to you is if you have notes that are based on chronological sequencing, it's as easy as, oh, match the notes up to this particular question. Well, this is what he's saying. Here's the important stuff that he's saying. I better transcribe that, right? I better reformulate that in my own words. Most of you did at least that. The problems that I saw, there were two types of problems, two flavors of problems that I perceived. All right, and I told you guys all this. I took a lot of time to grade these exams. I really did. On my honor, on my oath, I did, okay? I spent about 45 minutes on each of you guys' tests, right? So that, there's 8 of you guys in this class. Well, there's 9 of you in this class. One of you didn't even give me an exam. I don't know what happened to that person, but hopefully she's still around. 8 of you guys gave me tests, right? It took me, well, you don't care what it took me almost 6.5, almost 7 hours. All right. So the point is, I take a lot of time. And why do I write all those comments on your exams? Because I want to show how smart I am and how I know the answer is better than you? No, I don't care if you know that. Because if you don't know that by now, well, you shouldn't be listening to what I'm saying. You wouldn't be in this class anymore, right? So I have to presuppose that you must assume that at the very minimum, right? De minimis, you must assume that I know what I'm talking about. So it's not my purpose or intent or the purpose of the rationale, the rhyme and reason as to why I do what I do on these exams is not to demonstrate the vastness of my knowledge as it relates to history and to therefore denigrate whatever it is you said. Absolutely not. I don't mean to demean or denigrate anybody. Absolutely not. My purpose is to provide you with sufficient insights and clarification so that you know precisely what was defective about your original answer, so that you can rectify and ameliorate those concerns that I'm engaging with, so that you can aspire to higher levels of success in subsequent exams, right? This is all about analytical writing is what this is. Now, I also said it's about listening. It's about critical listening skills. Okay, that's obviously important. It's about critical reading skills. Are you reading the directions? Are you instrumentalizing and operationalizing those directions? Some of you are. Some of you seem to not give a shit about the directions. That's fine. But next time around, understand this. I'm not going to be so lenient when I grade this next time. Some of you seem, to think that you could just go ahead and send me PDF files, right? And there's no problem with that, right? I docked those people 8 points. Well, next time you're going to forfeit all 20 points. And I might start taking points off the other questions as well, just for that. And I can do that, right? That's my prerogative. I probably won't go that far, but I'm tired of people not following directions. I can have this philosophical discussion with you guys. I don't think you did so poorly as to necessitate my question. What is the point of college? What is the function, the purpose, the value, the intrinsic value? What is the real point of this? I'll just consolidate, because some of you seem, well, I'm not going to be dismissive of your intentions, because some of you probably did make a good faith effort, but some of you didn't. All right, some of you genuinely didn't. Let me just say this, okay? I got so much to say about this test, and I got so little time, and it needs to be. I should just do a whole hour just to be talking about the test, right? I could do it. I could do 2 hours. I could do the whole day, right? At a minimum, okay, you got to ask yourself a couple of questions. All right, for those of you who did not do as well as you would hope, right? Maybe the person who got a 95%, person whose exam I'm actually holding, right? Maybe that person thought they were going to get 100%. Maybe they're displeased with the 95. I can't imagine you'd be displeased with that because that's a great grade. But if you want to do better, ask yourself these questions. Did I actually invest the minimum amount of time that Jeff recommended, Jeff admonished me to, at the very least, at the de minimis, right? The very least amount of time you could possibly conceivably invest in this and still aspire for a decent grade, not a great grade, but a passing grade. I said 3 hours, okay? And that's why I gave you guys the week off. Otherwise, it would have been 4 hours of lectures 2 weeks ago, right? But you didn't have that, okay? You didn't have that out of consideration for the fact that I was being generous. I was being lenient. I didn't have to do that, but I did it, right? And why did I do that? In furtherance of ensuring that you guys had maximum time, maximum opportunity so as to dedicate yourselves exclusively to the formulation and the conceptualization and the writing of the responses, the answers to these questions. Did you avail yourself of that time? Some of you, obviously, the answer is no. Okay, I can tell, right? Because if the stuff that I saw on some of those tests represented at least 3 hours of work, well, I'm sorry, then you're obviously you're not putting the time in, or you're not putting the effort in, or you're typing at literally 1 word per hour, okay? I mean, that's how fast you must be typing if that took you 3 hours to type that stuff. Because not only was some of that stuff devoid of substance, but it was also devoid of content. It wasn't very big. You didn't give me much quantity, you didn't give me much quality, right? It couldn't have taken you any more than an hour for some of you to write that, right? And that's fine. If that's all you want to do, if you just want to, aim for the D in this class, more power to you, right? I mean, I wish you luck in that, okay? I wish you luck in not failing this class because you don't know, because you're very precipitously perched, right? You're right on the edge, right? You're right on the precipice. You fall over by a few points and you're in the F zone. I don't want anybody to be in the F zone, all right? I'm going to talk about the extra credit, not today, but I'm going to throw it out there probably in the next couple of weeks. And it is going to comprise 10% of the aggregate overall cumulative grade for the course, which is great because for those of you who are doing D's and F work, you can actually improve your grade by an entire letter grade. That's a good opportunity. Anyways, I do feel as though I have to say something about this test a little bit more. All right. So, are you putting the time in? Right. Number 2, are you? Have you been assiduously and diligently listening to the lectures? Have you been taking notes? Not meticulously necessarily, but just in a generally comprehensive manner. Right? Do your notes? Are your notes primarily reflective of the main points, the main arguments, the main ideas that I assert in the context of these lectures? Right? Are they or are they not? I don't know. Okay, I mean, I can't ask you guys to show me your notes because I'm not there. Right? I can't vet and corroborate and authenticate your notes. I don't know. Maybe you're taking good notes. Maybe you're not taking any notes at all. All right. So I do want to make I want to make one point here. Right, and this is an important point. So this person whose exam I'm holding, as I said, is an outstanding student. You know who you are, Miss 95%. I think this is a girl. I don't know. This person, in response to, let me see, I should have highlighted it, but I didn't. In response to question number 3, okay, this person wrote in response to that, wrote a very, probably I would say 3, I was going to read this, but it's going to take me probably a couple of minutes to get through this, so I'm probably not going to read this. I'll just start out. This is in response to the question that was asking about the thesis of Niall Ferguson, okay? And then the next one wanted you to contrast that thesis with the postulations of Jared Diamond because they are sort of dichotomous in relation to one another. Number 3, in response to that, this person wrote, one of the important things to note is Niall Ferguson likes to believe he is a civilized man. He mentions a civilization cannot be produced without cities. Cities bring many things with them and ultimately lead to success. Jobs are created, an economy is established, and other important aspects are built off of a city. What is the purpose of culture? So asks this person rhetorically. To express emotion through a play, a song, or a painting. You can show how much love something close to you. You can show how much you love something close to you through these various ways. What is the purpose of civilization? To acquire land, buildings, and other objects that will strive for success. This is a domino effect. The more you acquire, the more buildings that will go up, the more jobs you will create. You need these aspects in order to have a civilization, jobs, production, trade, and ideas. Anyways, this person goes on in this particular fashion, and that's about 1/3 of what this individual wrote, okay? 1/3 of what they wrote, right? Some of you people, the people who didn't really do very well, you gave me maybe 1/3 of maybe 1/15 of what this person wrote, right? Maybe a couple of sentences, right? And it didn't have the same qualitative connotation, okay? Right? So again, I'm not necessarily looking for quantity per se, but generally you're going to have to say a lot to cover all the points, okay? Because there's a lot of stuff that is assimilated under the rubric of these questions, right? And you have to be fairly comprehensive and holistic in your approach, because otherwise you're just not going to be adducing all the relevant facts, and you're not going to be doing what you have to do, right? And what you have to do is demonstrate to my satisfaction that you actually paid attention enough to these lectures that you were able to assimilate the important points. And your purpose, therefore, in these exams is to tell me everything you possibly can tell me in response to a particular question as it bears on the topic as it's being asked of you on that question, right? And some of you just didn't seem to care, right? And I can't think that you didn't know, because I've told you guys again and again and again, and I sent out that email. I sent out several emails reinforcing and reiterating the importance of this exam, and I made a great speech, or maybe not a great, I made a point of making a speech in this YouTube video, not this one, but about 4 or 5 back, right, about how important this exam is, because this class doesn't entail anything else. Almost every other class that's out there at Go-Quebec or anywhere else you guys can enroll. This is the last point I'll make, then I'll go on to philosophy, right? Any other possible class you can enroll in is not just exclusively going to come down to exams, all right? It's going to involve homework, take-home homework, right? It's going to involve readings. It's going to involve group work. It's going to involve presentations. It's going to involve a lot of other busy work that is spread out. It's parcellated out over the course of the semester, right? And that's a lot of time, and that's a lot of effort, and that's a lot to ask of you guys. I don't ask anything. I don't even ask you guys to do the readings, right? Because what do? I read the book for you. And then I come back and it's story time with Jeff, and I tell you what I think the important points are, right? That's easy, right? All you have to do is listen to these videos, record that which is important, take notes, or don't. You don't even have to do that. Just wait till the exam comes out, right? Look at the questions, and then go back and find where I'm talking about these things that relate to the questions, and then listen to what I have to say, and reformulate that in your own words, and write as much as you can. It's as easy as that, for God's sakes. It's only 7 questions. I don't understand anybody who comes along and says this is too hard, or this is too much work. I'm not asking you guys to do anything else. Maybe I should, right? Maybe it's time for group work. Maybe it's time you guys should post your own YouTube videos, right? Because that's a participation requirement I'm going to impose. No, I'm being facetious. I'm not going to do that, right? But it's ridiculous for anybody to insinuate that this class is so hard, right? Oh, I just, and look, it's not as though I don't have sympathy for those of you who don't really understand history. But what do I always say? What have I consistently said throughout the term? Okay, I hate to take this. This is not me. I'm not angry with you. All right, I'm not angry. I'm trying to motivate. Okay, this is my Don Shula sort of NFL coach sort of disposition here, right? This is the what was the guy that coached the Chicago Bears? The Packers, right? All right, this is the speech that they give in the locker room before the Packers go out there and dominate the Lions or whoever it is they're going to play against. Well, my point though is to motivate you, right? And the last thing that I wanted to say is that if you don't know what the hell I'm asking, or you have no idea what the hell is going on in this class, why have you not called me, for God's sakes? For Zeus's sake, for the sake of Apollo and Zeus and Thor and all the other gods, right? Call or just email me. If you don't want to talk to me, that's fine, right? You think I'm intimidating, whatever, right? You don't like me? I know at least one of you doesn't like me. Somebody actually told me that they overheard one of their fellow classmates talking trash about me in the hallway. Right, I'm not going to get into that because that's a little bit personal. But if you want to talk trash about me, that's fine, right? But just make sure you're doing it out of earshot of my comrades in the class who are loyal, and they're going to come back and tell me what you said. I won't hold it against you, right? I don't care. I don't take any of this personally, right? And neither should you, okay? Don't take the exam personally, right? I don't even look at you guys' names when I'm grading. I swear to God. When I finish the grading the exam, then I got to look at the grade. Obviously, I got to record it in my grade book, right? But I don't look at the grades. Right? I don't look at the names, right? And I do that so as to avoid even the pretense of any sort of unethical possible inclinations that I might have. But anyway, all right. What are we going to talk about today? Well, we already talked about. We talked halfway through today because we're coming up on 35 minutes here, and I told you I'm going to try to cut this down. What I need to talk about today, and what I really want to talk about today, is we're going to be pivoting, right? This is a sort of a cathartic moment in this class. We were talking about the history of the French Revolution. We were talking about the Napoleonic era. We were talking about things that were happening in that time, physical events. Okay. Thus far, this has been sort of a menagerie of a little bit of military history. It's like a cocktail, right? It's like a blending of a cocktail. I like the cocktail analogy because I like cocktails, although I like to drink hard liquor right out of the bottle too. especially when it's in a paper bag, though I can walk around the street and, the cops, you know why people do that, right? Because you can't presume that people are guilty in this country. You presume innocence, right? So if you see somebody walking with a bag around a bottle, you have to assume it's a bottle of Gatorade, right? Even though I got a bottle of Jack up in there, right? And I'm getting tuned up in the middle of the afternoon, right? And no cops are gonna know. Okay, that's how you roll. If you live on these mean streets of Bloomfield Hills, where the average house is $2.3 million. Yeah. We up in the hood down in here. No, we're not. Okay, so we were talking about events, right? Physical events, and as I say, this has been a cocktail. We had a little bit of military history. We had some legal history, certainly, right? We had some cultural history. Okay, we had a little ecological history, right? A geological sort of history, right? But now we're going to talk about sort of intellectual history, right? The history that really resonates and animates and appeals to my sensibilities, because I like this kind of stuff. It's the history, it's the philosophical trajectory of Europe at this time. And the pitch that I always make to students, because I know some of you guys just feel, I can just sense it. You're rolling your eyes, I can hear the oh man, this is going to suck some BALLs. All right, fine, it's not, okay? I promise you it won't, okay? Or if it does, they're not going to be that massive. It's not going to be that bad, right? And the reason I say that is because philosophy, believe it or not, is part of history, okay? Philosophy is a product of history, all right? No more than you can say, well, the automobile is completely independent of history. You can understand Henry Ford and mass production, the assembly line, and the guy who founded General Motors, right? And the Dodge brothers. You can understand all those guys without really having any historical perspective. No, you can't. No, you can't. Same holds true. The same obtains in the context of Europe at this time, and Europe vis-a-vis, the European history vis-a-vis in relation to the developmental trajectory of philosophical thought. Because the way that I put it is that philosophy in this time, in this period of the history of France and the history of Germany and the history of Europe in general, is what really provides the impetus for revolutionary fervor. I mean, think about the ideas that were the sort of framework, the intellectual and ideological framework for the French Revolution, and subsequently for the German revolutions in 1848, which we're going to talk about in a little while. Think about that. You have to have an idea, right? You have to be inspired to go out there and to engage in what essentially constitutes sedition and treason against the state. Something has to inspire you. Something has to resonate with you. Some rhetoric, some ideology, some sense of idea, right? Something that is tangible and tractable and animated to you to the point where you're actually willing to indulge and engage in behavior which has considerable legal liabilities associated with it, right? And so ideas are important. Ideas matter. They are what inspire change. And change, of course, is what we're really talking about. Okay. Now, this is not a pitch for progressive ideology, right? I'm not going to take a stance either way, one way or the other. Or if I do, I'm going to defend one. I'm going to defend the other. I'm going to assert one. I'm going to assert the other. So let's talk about something known as the Congress of Vienna, right? So there's one little bit of sort of geopolitical history that I gotta close escrow on, and then after that we're going to turn to philosophy, and then from there on out it's going to be philosophy probably the next couple of weeks. So there's something called the Congress of Vienna, which occurs in 1814 and 1815. It takes a few months. It occurs in Vienna, as you might imagine, which is in Austria. And it is dominated and sort of superintended by this guy called Clemens Metternich. Okay, and his name is on the slides. I got the slides here. I actually printed them off. I'm not going to show you the slides because I'm going to look like an idiot doing them. But I will send those slides out sometime between, well, now, October 1st, and the time that you guys actually view this video, which is 12 days from now. And on those slides, I don't care about names, though. You guys know that, right? So anyways, the Austrian foreign minister, right? His name is Clemens Metternich. Very conservative guy, okay? And he decides that the major European powers are going to have a power. They're going to sit down, and basically they are going to reassert the primacy and the importance and the validity, the legal and moral validity of monarchy and autocratic rule of kings, predicated on the assumption, the presupposition, that those monarchs are empowered by virtue of the divine right of kings, the divine right of monarchs to rule over all the citizens, all the peons, all the peasants, and even the bourgeoisie and the petty aristocracy. That prerogative, that power, that responsibility derives from God because it is ordained from on high, and they trace their regnal power and their regnal lineage and their regnal authority all the way back to the very first chapter of the Bible, Genesis. We're going to talk about this. This is rather intriguing proposition, right? I think from a sort of an analytical, sort of quasi-legal standpoint, it's absolutely farcical. But nevertheless, people were ignorant, so they didn't have the analytical faculties to actually test it out. What else happened at the Congress of Vienna? The Congress of Vienna basically asserts that Europe, the diplomacy and the geopolitical affairs of Europe
are going to be controlled by the great powers of Europe, okay? Because formerly, the problem with Napoleon is that he elevated a lot of nations, a lot of smaller nations that were formerly very petty and insignificant. He elevated them. He gave them greater power because they were associated with his entourage, his marshals and his brothers in certain cases. And he gave his brothers and his marshals, he gave certain of the members of his entourage, his associates, his homies, right? He gave them royal powers and essentially dictatorial authority in various nation states across Europe. The conquered the nations were subjugated, right? And lay prostrate before the power of Napoleon, right? So there was a disparity. There was an upset of the balance, the status quo. All right, there was a very substantial upset in the homeostasis that existed in Europe for a very, very long time. Because remember, before the French Revolution, there really were no. There was a revolution in England in the 1640s. Right, there was an English Revolution, the Civil War, the Roundheads and the Cavaliers, and there were fallen heads rolling all over the place, rolling all the way down London Street, right? All over the place, right? But that was in the 1640s, okay? And that was one rather isolated incident, okay? And then you had the American Revolution, right? But that was across the pond, as the British would say. That's on the other side of the Atlantic, right? So that's not really tangible. That doesn't have a lot of import. That's not really significant. It's neither here nor there. Out of sight, out of mind. Hear no evil, see no evil, be no evil, as I think Truman used to say. Now, what about the French Revolution? Well, that brings revolutionary spirit, the revolutionary ethos, the idea that we, the people, are going to violently, viciously repudiate the traditions and the heritage and the conservatism of old. And we are going to, this is not going to stop, we're not going to cease and desist until there is a capitulation of the power of the aristocracy and especially the monarchy. Now, this is the first time in the context of European history, really throughout the course of European history, accepting what happened in England in 1640s, right? This is the first time you really saw a revolution that was sufficiently animated and sufficiently inspirational that it actually was consummated, right? It reached its culmination. It was brought into fruition, and then it reached its logical terminus, which was, of course, the guillotining of Marie Antoinette and her douchebag husband, the king, Louis XVI, right? Now, that was something that was remarkable. And so what the Congress of Vienna is it is a reactionary conservative response to radical ideology as it was promulgated in France in the course of the French Revolution, and as those ideological notions gained traction and were spread and proliferated and disseminated across Europe by virtue of Napoleon's conquering armies. Think about it this way: Napoleon, as I said, Napoleon was the harbinger of revolutionary ideals, right? Now he dressed it up under the auspices of monarchy, or perhaps the other way around, right? You could say that, well, in actuality, he was an autocrat. He was an emperor, right? He was just dressed up under the guise, the false pretense of revolutionary ideology. But in actuality, right, he was as conservative as the rest of them. We're going to talk about the dichotomy that delineates conservatism and progressivism or liberalism, because there is a very profound difference, right? And it's a fundamental philosophical, I would say, just sort of incipient core distinction that transcends time, that transcends space, that transcends different cultures, right? Because there's something that is, in my way of thinking anyway, it seems to me that if you look at liberal ideology in Brazil right now, okay, the people who are opposed to Jair Bolsonaro, right, the president down there who wants to be like Trump, right, he's sort of a less hardcore version of Trump. Well, he's actually a more hardcore version of Trump because he served in the paramilitary. He served in the airborne forces, actually. Whereas Trump is actually less military in terms of his experience, less militarily qualified than yours truly. I didn't serve, but I went to military school for 4 years, all right? I was a major. Trump was never a major. I think he was a first lieutenant when he was in military school. So I technically outrank him. And I got 2 years of ROTC under my belt at Michigan State University. So I got more vast military / paramilitary experience that complements of the United States Army, actually, who ran those programs, than Donald Trump has. So, which is to say that the guy doesn't have much military experience at all. That's not to say that you must have military experience to have an appreciation and a reverence for the service that is rendered on behalf of the military and those who serve in it. But it's to say that I think those two things are in many ways synonymous. Now, liberalism, right? Liberalism is the same now in many ways. Liberalism is predicated on the same foundational presuppositions because liberals, much like conservatives, have a certain worldview, a certain way of conceptualizing the world that is always true. It's axiomatic. Now, the way I look to put it, okay, because I don't like to offend anybody's sensibilities, and I know for a fact All right, I just can sense it. My force intuition. I'm using Jedi mind trick right now. I know some of you are just looking to take offense at something that I say, right? And I actually, before I came down here today, before I was wearing my security hat and my, I don't know what this is, Tommy Hilfiger coat. This is my girlfriend gave me this. She's got a real great sense of style. She looks absolutely amazing. I'm gonna have her come down here in a couple of weeks and do a little fashion show for you guys. No, I'm talking trash. But before I was wearing this, I was actually wearing a sort of a military style shirt because I was out there doing my lawn today, and I like to intimidate the neighbors, and I like to show off my military pride because this is actually some of my old uniform items from military school. I'm not intimidating the neighbors; I'm just being facetious. But I was thinking about wearing that because some of you seem to disbelieve that I actually was in military school. Some of you don't care. I know probably most of you don't give a crap about any of this, right? But I was going to come down here. I was going to have that uniform on, and then I thought to myself, well, I better not. Okay, I better keep my own counsel on this and err on the side of caution because I know somebody is going to send this YouTube link to somebody in the administration. And they're going to say this guy looks like a douchebag. Or maybe they won't say that, but this guy is unbecoming, right? What is this? He looks like he looks like a Cuban dictator or something, dressed up with his fatigue. So, anyways, you're getting Tommy Hilfiger and Walmart security hat today. Now, what was I saying? Liberalism, all right? Liberalism. Why do I have to tread carefully? The answer, I think, is intuitive because so many people in this country nowadays, in America and the United States in the 21st century, take these things so goddamn personally. I don't see why they do. Right? And taking politics personally is just like taking religion personally. It's tribalism at its very, very worst, at its very, very core. And what it really is it's an extension of narcissism. It's a narcissistic self. It's a solipsistic self, right? It's thinking about the world in terms of, well, I like this thing, and therefore it's important to me, and therefore how dare you say anything that's defamatory of this thing that I like, right? Just like people who like the Dixie Chicks, who are no longer the Dixie Chicks, right? Because they took Dixie out of it because they thought that was offensive, right? Now they just like the chicks, okay? They're the chicks, right? Or, yeah, I don't know, you like Michael Jackson, right? You like Shakira or somebody, right? Who doesn't like Shakira? She's absolutely amazing. She's beautiful and she's talented, right? And I talk some smack about Shakira, right? You take that personally. Well, it's no different if you like Donald Trump, you like Joe Biden, right? You take that personally. You shouldn't take it personally, right? Think objectively, right? Think dispassionately. Well, anyways, I have to get into discussing matters that have a political import to them and an ideological sort of implication. And I can't do that unless I preface this by saying that I'm going to make a concerted effort either not to offend anybody's sensibilities or to offend everybody's sensibilities equally, right? And I probably do the latter because I'm much better at giving offense than avoiding doing so. So what I say about liberalism in general is that the underlying assumption about liberalism is that it is unduly idealistic, okay? Because it presupposes that mankind, the essence, humanity, I mean, not mankind, womankind, transgender kind, right, whatever you want to refer to it as, but humankind, okay, is fundamentally good. That we are, this goes back to the ideas of Jean-Jacques Rousseau, and you'll remember him from that not very good lecture that I gave about 4 weeks ago. It was an adequate lecture, but it was kind of mundane, okay, because we were talking about mundane things, right? We're talking about ecology and the sun and the solar cycles and all kinds of weird stuff, right? But Jean-Jacques Rousseau had a liberal sort of philosophy, had a very liberal way of looking at things, and by that I mean that he assumed that human nature is fundamentally good, that we're intrinsically good. Okay, and that if left to our own devices, human beings will revert to a condition, a state of nature, as it's known in philosophical vernacular. And a state of nature, as far as Rousseau is concerned, is a good thing because it divests people of all the sort of material trappings associated with ownership, property ownership. And the more you ascribe value, intrinsic or extrinsic value, to property ownership, the more the inequality becomes more pronounced and conspicuous in the context of your culture, your society, your political paradigm, right? So that in a society where there is a tremendous degree of wealth and covetousness associated with the desire to acquire wealth, such as the United States, right? We are in one such society. Well, then, according to Rousseau, his theoretical postulation is that the greater the desire for wealth and the greater people are animated and motivated by their consumption of wealth and the more materialistic that society is, well, then the greater the disparities are going to be between those who do not have and those who do have. Is that true? Is that true? Think about that. Is that true? Is it true to say that when you think about the United States, is it true to say that there is a vast dichotomy, disparity, right? That there's a disparate condition that exists when you contrast the people who the Jeff Bezos, right, and the Elon Musk, the Elon Musks of the world, and the guy behind the Berkshire Hathaway guy, Warren Buffett, right? Those guys, right? Is there a vast difference between those guys and some schlupp sitting on the corner of 7 Mile and Woodward, just down the street from me? Does that guy, does that he have any of the privileges and the prerogatives and the kind of comforts associated with the life, the luxurious and rather ostentatious life that those guys, the Bezos and the Buffetts and the Elon Musks, right, that those guys have? Well, those guys are so rich, they're literally going to space just for shits and gigs, okay? And it's costing billions of dollars to fund those projects. Now, I'm not saying that's a bad thing, because I think that's progress of a sort, right? Whether it's privately funded, whether it's publicly funded, it doesn't matter. Private sector, public sector, as long as we're working towards the same objective, which is to, in furtherance of technology, which will enable us to more effectively explore the cosmos, that's a good thing all around, right? But I'm just saying, think of the differences. Now, is that a vindication of Rousseau's theory? Is that a vindication of Rousseau's theory? I feel like a Marxist dialectical here, right? That we're sitting around the coffee table in Geneva, Switzerland in 1850 with Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels, and we're having this exchange because this is formulative of the sort of philosophy, the philosophical underpinnings of Marxism. Well, this is the kind of conversations that political ideologues of communism would actually have, because they had a reverence for Rousseau. In fact, Rousseau, in several ways, the ideology of Rousseau anticipates the ideology of Karl Marx. And you're saying, how the hell could Rousseau, who's way back there in the 150 years before Marx ever comes along, how could his ideology anticipate that which Marx is saying? For those of you who don't know who Karl Marx is, he's the guy who wrote, amongst other things, the Communist Manifesto. He wrote the 18th Brumaire of Louis Napoleon, whereby he makes his, and people misunderstand this what Marx was saying about religion, but I shouldn't get into that because I have a whole lecture about Marx. But Marx was essentially asserting that the proletariat, the common people, ought to have the right and indeed the responsibility, the duty to take possession and control over the means of production, the factories and the fields, right? In fact, the first Red Army, the first Soviet Army, before it was the Soviet Army, it was the Red Army, and when it was the Red Army, it was known as, in Russian, I don't know the Russian, again, my beautiful girlfriend's gonna have to come down here and interpret this, but it was known as the army of the workers, the peasants, and the workers, the peasants, and the soldiers, all right? Now, those are the poorest of the poor, right, in Russia, okay? And Marx's ideology was essentially an extrapolation of, or an inference from, inferentially derived from, the ideological predilections and philosophical inclinations of Rousseau, the postulations of Rousseau. Now, why is that true? What was Rousseau saying? Right? Or what was the import of what Rousseau was asserting? Well, he's saying that if mankind is good, intrinsically virtuous, and altruistic, and noble in our spirit, right? The French talk about the noblesse oblige, the noble obligation that we have towards one another to do good things just for its own sake. Well, Rousseau that would have been his truest conviction, right? If that's true, then we ought to renounce and repudiate the material trappings of all this, right? Because what is a society that is predicated on materialism? What does that invariably and inevitably and inextricably permit? What does it necessarily lead to? Follow that trajectory logically. What does it lead to? Does it lead to a disparity in terms of the comfort of the lifestyle that you experience? Do I experience a more comfortable lifestyle down here in Bloomfield Hills because I'm living in a multi-million-dollar estate? All right, I should just shut my mouth, because some of you are going to think that I'm just being boastful, right? This is not mine. I'm living in my parents' basement, for Christ's sakes, right? You know, I'm a complete and utter douchebag, right? Think about it that way, right? I'm a freeloader is what I am, okay? Now they're not here, okay? So I could bring ladies over here and convince them this is my house, and then I could be like, what are those pictures of all these people around? Well, who are these old people, right? Like, oh, those are my uncles and stuff, right? No, but is there a fundamental disparity, not just in terms of the quality of life that people experience based on wealth, but also access to power, access to political power, access to justice? That's what Rousseau asserted. Is that true? Consider that. Contemplate that. Right? Is it true to say that if you have more money in the United States, just take the United States, because Rousseau would have found this contemporary materialistic consumeristic society to be absolutely repugnant, and he would have abominated everything about, intrinsically and extrinsically, everything about the United States. Which is not to say that he's a Soviet, communist, a Marxist in the making. It's just to say that he wouldn't like what he saw. But think about it this way. Is there a disparity, a disequilibrium between the people who go to the court, the local 14th probate court over there on Telegraph and 18 Mile, just down the street from me, right? Or your guys' whatever the probate, the circuit did, whatever they call themselves, the municipal court there up in home. Is there a difference if you roll up in the court parking lot with a brand new Bentley, right? Leather interior, bulletproof windows, hella nice, right? And then you got like some Louis XIV cognac in there that you're sipping on. That bitch costs $16,000. Literally, the bottle costs $16,000 because it's crystal, right? Is there a difference between that guy and the guy who rolls up in a 1976 Aries K car, right? The blue book on that is probably less than the clothes that I'm wearing, right? $150, right? Is there a difference in terms of the access of justice that those people get? Yeah, of course there is, right? The one can afford a top tier lawyer who probably went to Princeton or Harvard or Yale or Northwestern, went to the school with Obama, right? And he's going to excel by virtue of his credentials and his bona fides and the fact that he went through a very rigorous and scrupulous legal education. Versus the other one's going to get a public defender, right? Who's going to be overburdened because their docket is always full because they got a ridiculously burdensome caseload. Those guys make shit money and they don't have comparable education credentials, right? Of course there's a disparity, right? We pretend that there's not. We like to believe that there's not. But in actuality, practically speaking, of course there is. Now, I'm not getting up on the soapbox and saying that we ought to repudiate American society and materialism. Although I don't think that would necessarily be a bad thing, right? Because Rousseau says that leads to a greater equality. It leads to a greater equilibrium amongst the people, right? He's not saying, what he's not saying, okay? It's important for you to understand what he's not saying so that you understand better what he is saying. He's not saying let's redistribute the wealth. That's not what Rousseau is saying, right? I'm not saying that at all, right? He's not saying, Jeff, because you have, there's a billiards table at your computer, your vintage 2002 laptop is sitting, right? And this over here is a ping pong table behind you, right? And you got all kinds of rich shit down here. You should go and just give that to the people driving by the road down there, all right? Just start giving. That's not what he's saying, okay? He's saying we shouldn't have that stuff to begin with. Right? Because once you fall into the trap of a material culture, well, that appeals to the base, the most crude and most deplorable and most wretched instincts and impulses that are ingrained in the fabric of man. Right? It corrupts man. It corrupts him because it makes him inextricably attached to material trappings which don't have any intrinsic value to them. And it causes man to be covetous and desirous of possessing more and more things that are beyond his real needs. Is that true? I think that is. There's some incipient truth at the core of what he is postulating, right? Now, I'm not going to tell you whether I'm a liberal or progressive or conservative or what I am, wherever. Most people don't recognize me, okay? I'll just say that, politically speaking. And I teach political science, so I know how to play it close to the chest. I'm going to play it very close to the chest because I don't want you guys to know what I am. But I think, suffice it to say, I think there's a lot wrong with both these ideologies. So how can you excoriate, how can you criticize the ideology, the philosophical precepts of Rousseau that I just postulated as they were? Well, you can say, is it true to say that mankind, our fundamental nature is such that we are inclined to be altruistic and compassionate and considerate and loving and gracious and all those sorts of things that Rousseau seems to presuppose? Is that true? Well, a guy by the name of Thomas Hobbes comes along, right? From Calvin and Hobbes, right? He hangs out with the cat, okay? Calvin /Thomas Hobbes. No, Thomas Hobbes is the guy. Calvin Hobbes is the stupid comic book, right? Thomas Hobbes comes along. He says, Rousseau, you're mistaken. All right, you're too idealistic. Going back to the aspersions that I cast upon liberalism in general, it has an idealistic outlook and an idealistic way of perceiving and conceptualizing the world, and indeed those who inhabit it. And the reason for that is because Hobbes says, think about human nature in its primal essential form. Think about mankind in the incipient stages of civilization, before we got to Western civilization, before we even got to Eastern civilization, before Mesopotamian civilization arose, right? What was mankind? What was humanity doing? Was there much humanity associated with Homo sapiens, right? Before we decided to achieve civilization and culture and literacy and music and writing and art and all the other things, was there a lot of civility associated with the existence of Homo sapiens? When we were out there, we had spears and we were chasing after the wildebeests and the whoever the hell else was out there on the Serengeti plains of Kenya. And before we moved up, because we're all Africans, right? Originally, we traced our lineage back far enough, right? The cradle of civilization, right? Well, actually, no, the cradle of humanity, right? It's different, right? The cradle of civilization is Mesopotamia. The cradle of humankind, the species, is sub-Saharan Africa, the fertile what the hell? Well, anyways, this is not an anthropology course, so I don't want to get down that road too far. But if you look at very remedial human societies, right, the most basic, most rudimentary form of human society, right, is there really a lot that's intrinsically valuable about those people, right? Are they maximally compassionate and very egalitarian in their principles? Are they very fair and equitable in ascribing equal consideration to all the various members of the tribe? Well, you could say, look at the Native Americans, right? Well, yeah, I would say, yeah, but the rebuttal to that is they're a very patriarchal society, right? Where there's a primacy of men, because men could be the chiefs and men could be the warriors, and they had a certain status quo that was conferred by virtue of them doing those functions, which they could only do. The a priori condition was them being men, okay? So therefore, right, being a male was the dispositive factor that resulted in you having certain privileges that you wouldn't otherwise have. So you can't say that was precisely egalitarian. But I think Rousseau would say, well, maybe it's not exactly precisely equal, but it's more equal than a capitalist society. Now, I think that's a point that a progressive could make, right? And that's a point that I think you conservatives have to concede. I certainly have to concede it, right? It is in a way, it is more equal. Okay, what's the problem with that? What's the problem with that? This is going back to Rousseau, right? What's the problem with this presupposition that humanity will treat people equally and will, you know, the motto of universal socialism, by the way, and for a while was adopted by communist nations. It was to each according to his need, from each according to his ability, okay, or the reverse, from each according to his ability, right? From each according to his ability, to each according to his need. What does that mean? Well, it means if you've got certain skills that are very utilitarian vis-a-vis the rest of society, you use those skills in a way that has a tangible, beneficial, sort of salutary effect and impact on people who actually need to avail themselves of the intellectual resources that you possess. If I'm a doctor, right, think of sans medecine, right, for those French people out there, right? Sans medecine, doctors without borders, right? Doctors with no frontiers, no constraints on them, right? Parlez-vous français? Right? No is the answer for me, right? But think about Doctors Without Borders, right? They go out there and they offer their skills, right? They offer the tangible, very advantageous, very utilitarian benefits associated with the skill of being a practitioner of modern medicine. Is that consistent with the leitmotif of Rousseau's philosophy? Yes, it is, right? From each according to his abilities, to each according to his needs, right? Medicine sans frontières, medicine sans frontières. Doctors Without Borders, right? Perfect illustration. Okay, that's consistent with the progressive ideological template and the mantra of liberalism. Very much consistent. What would conservatives say? Say you're wasting your time. Okay, you're wasting your time. I don't know how many of you guys have ever seen the movie Rambo. Right? Not the original, not First Blood, not the last one, not Last Blood, which was stupider than the Fast and Furious movies. The one actually in the middle, not actually no, the second to last one. It was just Rambo 2008, and he's in Burma, Myanmar. Okay, and he's got a bunch of idealistic Christian people that are there because they're on a mission, right? They're missionaries, and they want to go and they want to propagate and proselytize the version of Christianity, this Lutheranism, whatever it is, their adherence to the Karen tribesmen, the people of the Karen tribe, which is an ethnic subgroup living in Myanmar in the jungles, and there's a very great scene between Sylvester Stallone, who plays Rambo and actually directed and produced the movie, by the way. I give him a lot of credit for that. And this girl played by Julie Benz, very nice young lady, fun actress. And it goes something like this. He says, well, what are you bringing up the river? Because she's one of the Christian missionaries. And she says, well, I'm bringing medicine, and we're bringing Bibles, and we're bringing crosses and crucifixes and stuff. And he says, you're not bringing any guns? She says, no, why would I do that? He says, you're not going to change a thing. You're not going to change a thing. Burma's a war zone. Myanmar's a war zone. Unless you go there and you have the instrumentalities of death and destruction, you can't facilitate any change. And for you to think otherwise, for you to think that you can appeal to the sensibilities and the hearts and minds of those people by convincing them that Christianity is great and God is good and Jesus is their Savior and their Lord, and that you're going to teach them how to read and write, and they're going to appreciate and respect you, and they're going to change and adapt and evolve for that. That's absurd. All right, that's facially spurious. It's insane. It's ridiculous. It's a waste of your time. It's a waste of my time. I'm not bringing you up there in my little sampan boat. Now, what's wrong with that? Is now that's the opposite of a sort of progressive liberal mindset, isn't it? Right? What do we call that? What kind of position is that? Is Rambo being pragmatic? Would you say he's being pragmatic? Would you say some of you Trump voters would say, yeah, he's being very realistic, right? Being very pragmatic, Jeff. I'd say he's being cynical. Okay. So my conception of progressivism / liberalism, because those are the same things, right? And that's Rousseau, right? That represents Rousseau. Rousseau is the incipient sort of, well, he's not the originator, but he's one. You can go all the way back to Plato, okay? And actually, Plato said something else. We're going to get to Plato, probably next time. But Plato wrote this great book called The Republic. All right, and it's a Socratic dialogue. You got this guy Socrates sitting around in this hypothetical meeting, him and Glaucon, and you got Parthenes over there, and you got hypochondria and whoever else is over. That's actually not a guy's name. That's a condition. I'm Alexander, Mistopheles, right? Whoever else. I can't think of many Greek names, right? But you got these guys sitting around there having a conversation. But back to liberalism. I gotta get not off track. Back to liberalism. What's the problem with assuming that John Rambo makes that assumption in the movie 2008, right? What's the problem with assuming that you're not going to do any good unless you have guns, right? Is that unduly cynical? Is that dismissive of the possibility that maybe some of that goodwill will intrinsically appeal to and therefore resonate with the sensibilities of certain of those people, those Karen tribes, remember, who are being subjugated and brutalized by the Burmese military. It's actually a really good movie. You get to see John Rambo, you get to see Sylvester Stallone literally rip some guy's head off at the end of the movie, right? This guy's a major in the Burmese military. He's kind of a cool guy, actually. No, he's not. I'm teasing, right? He's an interesting character, though. He likes to get drunk and likes to brutalize people. Fascinating. Psychopathology 101. But Rambo gets to rip his head off. So for that, he doesn't actually rip a guy's head off, but it's interesting CGI. What about this? So Hobbes comes along, again, Hobbes and Calvin and Hobbes. Thomas Hobbes comes along and he says, look at human nature in its primal essential form. It is bestial. It is barbaric. It is invidious. It is vicious, and it is violent. And you can't come, you Rousseau and you progressives, you ideological liberals, you can't come along and disabuse me of the notion that I have based on observing the facts as they are. The earliest human skeletons have spearheads in their rib cages, okay? Evidence of the brutality of that society, right? Evidence of if you can even call that society, because it's not civilized. It has no civilizational context. Now, Hobbes is saying that's fundamentally what we are, okay? You can put this veneer of civilization, you can cast this sort of veneer of civility over it, right? But fundamentally, we want to rape, we want to kill, we want to dominate, especially men, all right? And I'm sorry, guys, but I can't let you off the hook here because this is testosterone, right? That's the point, right? Actually, that's the point, right? That's exact. I should have made it that way. Think about it this way: why is what I can't say one of these guys is right, one of the guys is wrong, because some of you are going to say, well, you're taking sides, Jeff, and you said you weren't going to take sides. Okay, fine, but let me posit this: why is Hobbes more right than Rousseau? Why is Hobbes' position more defensible? Right? Why is it more scientifically and empirically valid and easily corroborated on the basis of what we understand about human biology? Well, that's the fundamental point, isn't it? Think about Darwinism. Okay, what does Darwinism postulate? Charles Darwin wrote a book, right? He wrote a couple of books, right? But the origins of the species, right? And what was his primary postulate? What was his primary theoretical postulation? Darwin asserted that we evolve through a process known as natural selection. And that entails what is known as survival of the fittest. Now you extrapolate that concept, right, to society, to civilization, to humanity. And what do? You get a form of social Darwinism, okay? What is social Darwinism? Social Darwinism goes back to what I was talking about 20 minutes ago when I was talking about the Congress of Vienna. What do you think those guys, Metternich and et al., those guys sitting around the table of Vienna were talking about? They were talking about, let's keep the old world in control. Let's reassert the preeminence and the supremacy of monarchy and the old school authority based on conservative principles. Why? Well, look at what Hobbes is saying. Look at social Darwinism. What is social Darwinism? It's taking the inference, right, extrapolating, applying the lessons, the principal lessons from actual biological Darwinism, right, evolutionary Darwinism, okay, that evolution is a matter of reproductive success, which itself is predicated on how big and strong and powerful you are. I mean, look, look at this, right? I know this is theatrical, right? But look, I'm not huge, but I'm pretty big. Why? And I used to be a lot bigger. Why is Jeff pretty big? Because I actually, for a long time in my life, I subscribed to a form of social Darwinism. Okay, I didn't believe, I mean, it wasn't a devotee or discipline of it, but I believe to a certain extent that it actually does have some real world tangible applications and ramifications. Think about it this way. Think about, how can I put this in a way that's not disingenuous? Well, think about in terms of selection, right? Mate selection. Is it true to say, I'm going to put my jacket back on because I'm looking like an idiot here. I'm looking like a weak, emaciated douchebag who thinks he's all that, but actually isn't. How about that? I know. All right. See, I can sit here and I can deprecate myself while I live a long day. That way, those of you who do want to talk trash about me have got nothing left to say because I've already said it. Right? That's the genius of my position. Now, why is social? Is Darwin correct? Let me ask that. Right? It's not a rhetorical question. It's a yes or no question. Is he right? Is he right or is he wrong? Think about natural selection, and don't think about it in the alligator world, right? Don't think about chimpanzee kind or giraffe or lion kind, right? No, think about mankind. Okay, think about humankind, right? Not monkey kind. Okay, think about actual human beings. Right? Does being bigger and stronger take away the trappings of civilized society, right? Or even leave them here, right? If you just go to the club, right? I know you guys got a lot of clubs up there in Houghton and Hancock, right? So you go to the club every night, right? There's all kinds of cocaine, all kinds of club music down there. It's a great, awesome time. No, I'm being facetious, right? But if you go to the club and you're a big, ripped, burly sort of guy, right? Are you going to have a strategic advantage over guys who are probably less strong and less confident and less assertive and less domineering than you are? Are certain types of women going to be attracted to that? Well, yes, that's a fundamental law of attraction, right? And for you to say that's not true, you're not arguing against me. You're arguing against human biology, right? You're arguing against basic, incipient, intrinsic predilections that are ingrained in us biologically through evolution, through natural selection, through adaptation, through the evolution of the species. Okay, this is just a fundamental axiomatic truth, and it's biologically accurate. All right. Now, if you say that, okay, if you say that, right, that we are fundamentally animals, that there's some bestial impulse that underlays all the great art and the culture and the music and all the other great things that we achieve, right? If you say that fundamentally we are animals and we have these brutish sort of impulses and these natural instincts, right? Remember that movie with Sharon Stone and Michael Douglas, Basic Instinct? You guys are too young to remember that. It's on, and you're too young, definitely too young to be watching that, right? I can't recommend that to you guys. It's almost softcore porn. Don't watch it. Don't watch it. Or you got to close your eyes to watch it, right? Because I don't want to destroy your fragile, youthful sensibilities. Don't want to pervert any of that, right? But Hobbes is basically saying that these are basic instincts, right? The instinct, the impulse is to go out there and brutalize and to rape and to kill and to murder and to take and to steal and to dominate, right? That's what it's all about, okay? What is there to impede that? What is there to restrain that? The power of the state. That's what Hobbes says. Is that a vindication of the right, the rectitude, the moral and the intellectual rectitude of the notion of the sovereignty of monarchs and the divine right of kings? Well, if you don't have another form of government as of yet, right? You don't have a really viable form of government that's been tested out yet, because you don't really have pure democracy. You have sort of quasi-democracy in the United States, but that was more of a republic. It was more of a federal republic than it was a democracy. Because Jefferson lost out to Madison in the Federalist Papers. Go back and read the Federalist Papers. You understand why I say it was more republic than democracy. So you didn't really have a pure democracy. The purest democracy you really had historically would have been 5th century Athens, right? But that was 500 BC. Okay, so you're talking at this time, that was, what was that, it was almost 2,000 years ago, okay? 2,200 years ago, right? Now, what is the problem? what is the problem here? What is the problem as it derives from the Hobbesian conception of humanity? It is this: if you have a civilized society, the only thing that's maintaining the civility in that society is the rule of law and the efficacy of the state to impose and to enforce and execute and administer that law unto its citizens. And the most efficient, expedient way of doing that is to ensure that you have a system whereby authority is effectively delegated from on high down to the lowest echelons. What's the most effective way of delegating authority in the context of the governmental systems that exist in this time in the context of Europe at this particular juncture? Monarchy. You can't say that, oh, well, the French Republic is really efficient. No, it wasn't. That was why Napoleon decided to have an election, basically, to transform the republic into an empire, right? Because he needed that executive power. He needed that executive prerogative, right? Because otherwise it was inefficient. It was antithetical to his interest to administer the empire more efficiently and to actually go out there and subjugate the people and rule over the rest of Europe. He couldn't have done any of that if it was a republic. His hands would have been tied, right? He would have been in bondage, okay? Not the BDSM sort of thing, the actual bondage, right? I'm literally physically bonded, okay? Right? Because I got handcuffs. That's what Napoleon would have been bonded, right? Or he would have been constrained legislatively because he would have been beholden to either the deliberative body, right, or some kind of judiciary, but he wasn't. So it seems to me that, and it certainly seemed to the minds that were the meeting of the minds at the conference of Vienna at this time, that conservatism is necessary. It is necessary if you presuppose that humankind fundamentally is not bad and it's certainly not good, because Rousseau was wrong about that, right? It's not. Hobbes is not saying it's bad, right? He's not saying we're all a bunch of malevolent, invidious psychopaths. He's not saying that at all. He's saying that yes, some of us are, right? And if the people who are psychopathic are also the ones who go out and take a bunch of steroids, right, before the age of firearms, right? And they're so big, they're all like John Cena, right? And they're all like Dwayne Johnson, and they're all like, whoever, right? Brock Lesnar, right? And they come around and they just brutalize everybody else, and they steal your girlfriend, and they rape her, and they kill you, and they take your children, they enslave your children. But that's what Hobbes is saying we're going to have, right? That's the state of nature in accordance with Hobbes. That's the state of nature according to the conservative paradigm, the conservative conception of what reality really is, okay? Versus the liberal state of nature is, well, it's like the back of the wall there, right? You guys see that nice balloon there, and there's some green hills. My mom actually painted that way back in the day. It's actually pretty good. There's a train set back there. I think I told you guys about that, right? But that's Rousseau's little ideal village, right? It's an idyllic place where people don't lock their doors, and you know your neighbor's name, and you give people a hug every day, right? It's like it's like living in Calumet or something, right? Right? Would Rousseau be very satisfied with what Calumet and Lorraine look like? He'd be more satisfied with that than what Detroit looks like, certainly, right? But I think the more you see of humanity, the more you realize that when people don't, and why is that the case? What's the difference? Well, this is more of a sociological question than it is a historical question, but I think it has a lot to do with the number of people and the relationship that the people have with the state, and the extent to which the state can actually effectively enforce the laws, right? Think about the number of law enforcement officers per capita in the Keweenaw versus the number of law enforcement officers per capita in Wayne County. I guarantee you it's orders of magnitude different, right? In favor of Keweenaw, because you guys know how many overlapping jurisdictions there are up there. So all this does relate to this sort of equation, right? Are people good? Are people bad? And here's what I would say. Here's one of the best, I think one of the best illustrations of this. Think about prison. What happens in prison? Of course, you're going to say, well, they're all bad because they all committed horrible felonies, right? They've all committed egregious. That's not true, right? That's not true, okay? Because there's a lot of status offenses out there, right? Now, if you commit a status offense, you're probably not going to go to prison, but there's different types of crimes, right? And they have different levels of malevolence associated with them, and they're not all equally repugnant morally, okay? So you got tax fraud people in prison, okay? You got the Bernie Madoffs in there, right? You got the Ponzi scheme guys in there, okay? And yeah, you got the gangbangers, you got the serial killers, you got the pedophiles and the rapists, you got those guys in there too, right? But what happens? Well, you go to the yard, okay, as they say in the language of the prisons, right? You go to the yard, you pump some iron, right? I actually got some weights over here. I'm not going to pick them up because I want you guys to see how strong I am. You might be intimidated by me. You go to the yard, you start pumping. You get big, you get hella big, right? And why do you do that in prison? Because otherwise, you get in those showers, you drop that soap. You better watch out, son. because you're going to have some real close surgery after that, right? I would know. I went to military school. It's the same there, right? I never got raped in the showers, but I know somebody who was sodomized by a shampoo bottle actually in the showers. Literally, I swear to God. And it wasn't done because they were deriving some sick, twisted gratification out of it. They were doing it because they were deriving. Well, they were doing it. These cadets who were doing that actually thought this was a form of punishment. But the point is, when you exist in that kind of society, right? When you exist in a society that where it's every man for himself, okay, in a prison, right? It's every man for himself, right? And that's why they keep them controlled. That's why they keep the population segregated, as they call it, right? They keep the Crips away from the Bloods. They keep the Latin Counts away from the, you know, whoever else is out there, the MS-13 guys, right? They keep those guys separate. They segregate them according to race. They segregate them according to gang affiliation. They segregate them according to the status of defense. They do, all right? They do, right? I know about this. It's called penology, right? It's a subdiscipline of criminology. Now, why, if that's true in prison, right? Don't you think if Rousseau was correct, then the prisoners would all be holding hands and they'd be singing Kumbaya and they'd be, you know, having a nice peaceable time together. You wouldn't even need guards with shotguns or tasers or anything like that, right? Because they'd just be having a nice time, right? Well, obviously, I think that's a very strong repudiation of the liberal conception of mankind and the reality of who we are, right? Our fundamental nature, anyways. Okay. Back to the point that I was making about the Congress of Vienna. And guys, I know sometimes I'm all over the place with these things, but what I try to do is I try to talk about one particular subject for a while, and then I may revert back to another subject, right? So if your notes are kind of like, you know, they're disorderly in some way, right? At least delineate them or organize them in accordance with a particular lecture, right? And I think that's a real good way of keeping track of your notes, right? Say, draw a line across the top of your notes, right? And that establishes the boundary between the notes associated with the lecture before this and then this lecture. And then after you're done recording this stuff, right, then another line, right, subsequent to the end of this, right? And then that's going to be whatever's contained within those two lines that's associated with this lecture, no matter what it is. So here's what I think that the pattern is in Europe in the 18th century, right? In the 18th century, of course, is the 1700s, and then the 19th century is the 1800s, and the 20th century is the 1900s, and the 21st century is the 2000s, right? And why do we count that way? Well, because the first century was 00 Anno Domini, right? Or BCE, if you prefer, or excuse me, CE, if you prefer, right? See how much I use the more modern connotations, right? Not at all. But 00 Anno Domini all the way up to, well, 99, right, or 100, and then you know, the turn of the first century. So that's why. So the 18th century, the pattern was this. The pattern was this. I'm wearing my fishing boots, guys. I mean, these are my lawn mowing boots, so wasps and snakes and whoever else is out there don't get me. The pattern is you start off with a conservative autocratic monarchy, right? The ancient regime, okay, as the French would say, right? The old form of rule, okay? That's what you start off with. And then there's a radical revolution, right? Because people are dissatisfied. There's a great deal of discontentment, okay? And a lot of that obviously has to do with the ideological inflections that are modulating the ways in which people understand and perceive their relationship to their rulers. Okay, but whatever the causes happen to be, because the causes are very multifarious. You can't say the causes are always the same for revolutions. They were different in Russia than they were from France. They were different in America and the United States than they were from a lot of these places, right? So the causes are multifarious, right? But this pattern that I'm trying to elucidate for you is systemic. Okay, it is pervasive. It is across the board, and I don't want to say it's axiomatic because it's not always true. This is the pattern everywhere, but it's the pattern most places, right? So old school, old power, conservative power, usually in the form of a king, right? A monarch, an absolute monarch with absolute authority in accordance with the divine rights of king, right? Then you have a radical revolution which overthrows that monarch, okay? And then you have the institution. You have the imposition, I should say, the imposition of a much more democratical form of government, right? And I use the phrase democratical intentionally because that's the phrase that these guys were using when they were writing about constitutions and philosophies and ideologies. That's the phrase that would be contemporaneous with the 18th century and 19th century philosophers. So then you have a much more liberal, more progressive-based form of rule that panders or accommodates or appeals to the sensibilities of the common people. And it tries to be more egalitarian. It tries to give consideration to the interests of the commoners. But it ends up not working because what ends up happening? You have a conservative reaction, okay? because the conservatives, be they from within the state or from without the state, they say this is going to result in chaos and disorder and inefficiency, and it's going to undermine the efficacy of the state, which of course, in a certain way, it did, right? Think about it this way: was France really successful? This is actually a very good question. I just thought about this. How successful was France, revolutionary France, before the advent of Napoleon? How many other nations had France conquered? You say, well, they conquered parts of Italy, and they were at war with themselves, so it's not really fair to compare those two. It's an apples to oranges. No, I say no, it's not apples to oranges. No. What's the dispositive difference between France before Napoleon and France after Napoleon? The executive power, the executive authority, the autonomy and the discretion and the control and the degree of hierarchical command structure that was actually imposed by Napoleon, incidental to his aspirations to consummate his own power as authority. Now, if that's what separates those two, if that's the distinction, the delineation between pre-Napoleonic France and Napoleonic France, right? And you say that pre-Napoleonic France wasn't nearly as successful militarily. Now, of course, yes, I'm fully cognizant of the other considerations, right? Because they hadn't had as much veterancy, experience fighting other nations as of yet, right? They hadn't implemented the meritocracy that was going to be so instrumental in advancing certain officers of skill, right? There were other things as well, right? But I think the primary difference, the primary point of demarcation between the success of Napoleon, the outstanding, outrageous, incredible, astronomical success of Napoleon, and the rather mediocrity, right, the strategic mediocrity of Republican France, was the fact that Napoleon had a great deal more executive authority. He had the prerogative. It was unrestrained, okay? Again, go back to Gladiator. Go back to Joaquin Phoenix's character, Commodus. It takes an emperor to rule an empire, so he says. I agree. I happen to agree with Commodus. I mean, he was a lecherous, incestuous, diabolical, maniacal, and malevolent ruler in the film and in reality. But hey, he makes a fair point, right? Go back to Episode 3 of Star Wars, right? Go back to my favorite Star Wars movie of all time, Revenge of the Sith, right? Why does Chancellor Palpatine insist on becoming Emperor Palpatine? Well, so as to, I forget exactly what he makes, the speech that he makes to the Galactic Senate, but something to the effect of, well, we, for in the interests of security and stability, I actually can't. I do a horrible Palpatine. I gotta work on it. I gotta get myself in the. I can't just flip the, flip the switch and then turn into Palpatine all of a sudden. I can do a pretty good voice, but I can't do it now. So what the point is that if you want to aspire to be a successful empire, and being an empire entails conquering and subjugating and subduing other people, well, it behooves you to embrace an ethos, a manner of ruling yourself that is more conducive to expeditious transmission of orders, dissemination of orders, command authority, right? A very expedient and efficient, exact manner of commanding the state. The state obeys the ruler just as the army obeys the general, right? Now that in and of itself necessitates a more conservative ideology, because that is in many ways antithetical to the precepts of liberalism, okay? So I think it's almost like a natural sort of androgynous quality that is associated with society. This is just so inextricable, right? It's not that you can say, well, it's just because France was so situated this happened the way that it did, Jeff. No. No, this is essential, right? If you aspire to conquer, if you aspire to be imperial, if you aspire to be a great nation, if you aspire to be Napoleonic in your aspirations and your desires and whatever your objectives are, well, then you need to have the means by which to effectuate, to consummate those aspirations. And you can't do that if you are impeded by the democratical sensibilities of a more Republican, liberal, progressive system, okay? Now, I'm just saying it's a fact of life. I'm not denigrating the quality of that system, right? Now, conversely, what happens? So you have a conservative reaction, right? So let's just chart this pattern once again, just so for the sake of being cogent and lucid and coherent. You start off with the ancient regime, right? The rule of the old school monarchs, right? You have a radical response to that, right? A revolutionary radical response in the form of a violent revolution, which succeeds in the overthrow of the king, right? You have the institution or the imposition of a more democratical state, right? A state which is more sensible to the considerations of democracy and libertarian values and the civil liberties that are so essential to our notion of freedom and ordered liberty, right? That, okay? But then, of course, there's a realization that we compromise, right? There's certain liabilities associated with that, right? Because it's a tenuous, very precarious situation because we can't be as efficient. We can't be as efficient when we have that form of governance in contrast to a form of governance which is a more executive form of rule, right? And so there's a conservative reaction. There's a backlash to that, right? We call that a reactionary response, right? And what does that reactionary response result in? The reinstatement of, you guessed it, the monarch. Okay. Now that's the cycle, right? Now see, I just went through that in my mind sitting here. Now if I did that as well as I did that, all right. Now of course I got more practice than you guys, but look, there's gonna be an exam question about this. Okay, I guarantee it. If it doesn't show up on exam number 2, I guarantee you it'll show up on exam number 3. All right. This business about conservative versus progressive ideology. I spent way too much time talking about this stuff for it not to show up on one of the exams. So just bookmark this. All right, mentally, not literally. Bookmark this mentally. What else do I really have to talk about with you guys? I'm coming up to an hour and a half. Right. I realize I spent literally half an hour talking about the test, but I do that for every group. Okay, because the first test. See, I want to go back and I want to talk more about the test now, and I got to try not to. But the first test is an educational experience for some of you. It shouldn't be, because you guys should have known exactly what was expected. What did I tell you all on the first day? What did I say? I wish I had recorded this, right? But that's okay, because I got a pretty good memory. What did I say on the very first day of class? I said a lot of things, right? But one of the things that I said was, this is going to be a test-based, exam-based class, whereby your grade and the merit which I assign, the academic merit which I assign to you, is going to be predominantly, it's going to be exclusively a function of your performance on essay-based examinations. I told you that. You knew what you were getting when you bought into it, okay? They say caveat emptor. Well, that doesn't apply in this particular case. Buyer beware, right? Latin, okay? Doesn't apply in this case, right? Because you knew exactly what you were buying into. So for you to complain now, ex post facto, is to be a bit disingenuous to the representations that I had originally made. And for your seemingly, maybe you're not, the assent which is implied by you not disenrolling yourself in this class. Now that's the argument I would make to any of you who came along and said, "Oh, Jeff, you bamboozled me. I didn't see this coming. This exam, this is scary, and it was terrifying. I didn't know what the hell was going on." Well, you knew what you signed up for. Okay, so don't complain now. Conservative ideology, conservatism as an ideology. What does it mean to be a conservative? Sort of a metaphorical question. Let's just take the anatomy of the word conservatism, right? What does it mean to conserve? The law was the first. So there's Newtonian laws, right? There's the physical laws of the universe, right? And I never got to physics, but now I'm enamored with astrophysics. And you can't understand astronomy unless you understand physics to a certain extent. So one of the principal laws, the Newtonian laws, is that the law of the conservation of energy, right? What does conservation of energy stipulate? Well, it means that you've got this thing that's rolling down a hill, okay? And it conserves energy when you stop it, right? Actually, that's a very bad example. Think about pistons in cars, right? The pistons they're going really fast, right? And they're generating heat, okay? This is more thermodynamics, I guess, than the law of conservation of energy, right? But that heat has got to go somewhere, right? And you can use that heat to propel things, steam, right? Steam power, okay? All right, so this is actually a real bad analogy. It's falling apart because you guys can tell I don't have a scientific mind for this stuff. But the conserve, well, I guess the point I'm trying to make is to conserve. You think about, well, okay, the economics, right? The economic model, right? If I'm a profligate spender, okay, I'm a promiscuous spender, okay? My girlfriend's daughter, okay? I talked about her. I slightly sort of backhandedly disparage her, but she's phenomenal. She's the most beautiful woman I've ever known. And she's actually very talented. She can speak different languages. She can play the piano. She can do like gymnastics and stuff. She's amazing. And one of her problems is that she's a very promiscuous spender. Okay, she likes to spend money on stupid shit. Right? She likes to go to this place called Somerset, which is just down the street from me. It's this horrible mall. It's the worst place in the world. It's the opposite of the Pirates of the Caribbean ride at Disneyland for me, which is my favorite place to be. Because I told you guys I want to go jump off the boat there and actually join the pirates, the animatronic robotic pirates, and pretend I'm one of the robots there. She brought me to Sephora once, which is a horrible like torture chamber type place. It's called Sephora, right? It's basically like a North Korean torture chamber where they pull your fingernails out and they take a hammer and they knock out your teeth. No, it's not. It's like a makeup type store. She brought me in there and I literally had to run out to my car in the parking lot, which is like a mile away because it smelled horrible in there and there were all these pretentious people. It was disgusting. But she buys a bunch of stupid shit there. That's the opposite of being a conservative, right? When it comes to spending, okay? I am a very conservative spender, right? The clothes that I'm wearing are the clothes that I own. right? Well, that's not, I mean, I have more clothes than these, but not very many more clothes than these, okay? So to conserve is to try to maintain, right? To try to hold on to, retain things, I suppose you could say, right? So when we apply that principle to ideology, right, the political ways of conceptualizing how we ought to rule people, right? Retain, well, it's the old mantra, right? If it ain't broke, don't fix it. You've heard plumbers and electricians. Well, you don't need a skilled tradesman to say that. I mean, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, right? Is that a conservative principle? Is that an expression and articulation of a conservative ideology at its core? Yes, it is. Yeah, yeah. Right. So if you have a system that works, even if it's not the perfect system, right? It's not perfectly conceived in the vested interests of the egalitarian ethos of most people. Well, it's good enough and it works, right? There's an old saying, an old military saying actually, right? You learn this when you go to ROTC to study to become an army officer. It goes something like this: don't make the best the enemy of the good. Don't make the best the enemy of the good. What that means is there's a minuscule percentage, there's a slight possibility, a probability that you can assign to achieving the very greatest thing, right? The optimal good, all right? You can almost achieve that. Think about investing, right? I can possibly invest my money in Tesla, right, or SpaceX or Blue Horizon, right? Those space companies that Elon Musk and his competitor, that other douchebag, have got going, right? I could invest my money in that, and potentially I could gain a lot, right? That's the best. That's the very best thing, right? But I got a safer bet if I invest my money in Ford, right? Or General Motors, or Nissan, or Honda, or especially Toyota, because they make the best cars in the world. Even ISIS loves their cars, right? It's good enough for ISIS, good enough for me, right? Is that fair? Is that a fair representation of that? I think it is, right? Yeah. Don't go for the most attractive girl in the bar, right? Go for the medium attractive girl, right? Because if you go for the most attractive girl, she's not gonna accept you, right? Because you look like a douchebag or whatever, right? Especially for me, right? And then the other girls are going to be insulted, right? They're not going to want anything to do with you because you passed them up. Or turn this around. I mean, I don't want to be construed by any of you as being misogynistic, right? I'm a young lady, right? I'm Jeff Rena, right? And I'm going to the bar, right? And I'm going to sound not like a girl. And I'm looking for a hot guy. I don't go for the hottest guy. Right? I go for the middle guy, right? I go for the medium guy, right? Don't make the best the enemy of the good. That is, to my mind, one of the ways in which you can sort of conceptualize this this thing that we're talking about here, in the sense that I got to be careful. I got to be careful not to get stuck here because I've got an hour and 40 minutes on the clock, and I don't want to sound like an idiot here in the last 10 minutes. But what I think I'm trying to say here is that this is the conservative ideology, right? Let me just try to wrap these strings, tie these strings up here, because I know there's a lot of loose ends here. Don't make the best thing into the good, right? They're saying, look, monarchy is good, okay? It works, right? It may not be the ideal, right? It may not be the penultimate form of governance, okay? It may not take the greatest consideration of the egalitarian precepts of certain people, right? But it works because it ensures the enforcement of laws, it ensures the maintenance of order, it ensures the administration of justice to an extent, right? It does those things. And primarily, that's what we ought to be concerned about. That's what we ought to be concerned about. Because that's more important. That's more important than the sort of things that progressives are concerned about. They're concerned about libertarian ethos. They're concerned about the government not telling them what they can and cannot do. Right now, people confuse this. People think that that's actually, that's the conservatives are opposed to that. Well, there's a different brand of conservatism nowadays, which says government hands off. Right? They're concerned about the government. But back then, conservatism was synonymous with a strong, powerful central government. I mean, think about a monarchy, right? It doesn't get any more strong than that. It doesn't get any more centralized, more autocratic than that. It could be totalitarian, depending on the whims and the caprice of the ruler. Okay, so I think that to be a conservative is to want to maintain and perpetuate and honor your traditions, to maintain the traditions and the heritage. All right, again, think about Lorien, honoring our traditions while embracing the future. Or so says the mantra of the, I forget what it says. That's a good saying. I don't know if that's what it says, but it says something like that, right? Well, conservatism is don't embrace the future, or do embrace the future, but do so incrementally. Do so slowly, do so cautiously and scrupulously, so that you ensure that the future is worth actually embracing and worth actually having. Progressivism is different. Well, before I get to that, what are some conservative institutions, right? One of the questions I actually have on the slides, I think it's on the slides. The slides are over there. I don't feel like going to get the slides. Actually, the slides are in my hand. I'm holding the slides. But the slides didn't come out very well because I'm running out of blue and green ink, and so my printer printed them very shoddily, and so I can't really read the slides. I don't even know why I brought them down here. But there's a question I have for you. So does conservatism? Well, I got to make some other points before I ask this question. The idea is that nations, this is according to the conservative ethos, right? The conservative outlook. Nations should be governed by authoritarian rulers. Now, ideally, the authoritarian ruler will be an enlightened ruler, right? He's an enlightened ruler in the sense that he embraces Enlightenment philosophy and Enlightenment principles, like Frederick the Great, right? Very smart, very wise, very judicious, very fair, very reasonable. Okay. Now, the flip side of that coin is, well, if it's a hereditary monarchy and you're insisting on the continuation of monarchy because you're a conservative and you want executive authority, you get what you get, right? Sometimes you get a good monarch, sometimes you get a Saddam Hussein, right? Sometimes you get a Thomas Jefferson, sometimes you get a Uday Hussein, right? Who likes to drive around in his Maserati and abduct and rape and kill women, right? Sometimes you get that, right? Just luck of the draw, right? And you're shit out of luck if you get Uday Hussein as the next king. That's the downfall. All right, that's a good argument against monarchy. It's a good argument against the conservative principle, the ethos of conservatism at this time. I'm going to come up to these arguments, right? Because you guys know I love making and breaking arguments, right? I'm going to make this argument. I'm going to try to break it down. What else do the conservatives say? Well, they say that the rule of the king has to be predicated on the fundamental assumption that the king is ordained and anointed by God. Okay, that we have to believe in God because. Well, in the words of Dostoevsky, right? Or in the words of Voltaire, if God did not exist, we would have to invent him, right? And in the words of Dostoevsky, well, one of the characters from the brothers Karamazov, right? Smerdyakov. Right? I only know this because I like Russian literature, right? But Smerdyakov is a stupid character in this book called The Brothers Karamazov. The Brothers Karamazov is a philosophical novel written by a guy by the name of Dostoevsky. And Smerdyakov comes along and he says, well, he doesn't say that, but he says religion. He says what does Smerdyakov says? He says without God all things would be permitted. That's what he says. Right? Without God all things would be permitted. Right? Now I think that at his core, Smerdyakov is probably a conservative. Why do I say that? And Voltaire, even though many liberals sort of adore and have nothing but reverence and adulation for Voltaire. Voltaire is essentially asserting a very conservative principle. Right? Why do I say that? Right? If religion didn't exist, we'd have to invent it. And Dostoevsky has ventriloquized through Smerdyakov. If there was no God, all things would be permitted. Well, why is that a conservative sentiment? What does it assume? What do you assume when we take away God? Well, what does God do? What does religion do? The edifice of religion, what does it do? It inculcates in us moral instruction so that we know how to behave. So that we know how to behave. What does it presuppose? Without religion, we wouldn't know how to behave. Without religion, we'd be a bunch of primal beasts. We'd be we'd be brutish, we'd be brutes, right? We'd be savage brutes, going and bashing each other over the head and raping each other's girlfriends. Is that what we'd be without religion? Well, I don't personally assert that. I don't subscribe to that. I'm an atheist, so I'm a secular humanist is what I am. So I don't believe that, right? But I think there's evidence for that. There's some evidence for that. Not I don't think overwhelming evidence, but there's some evidence for that, right? And what about this business of, well, Voltaire comes along. Oh, if God didn't exist, we'd have to invent it. Why? Why do I say that that's conservative? Conservatives assume that if you don't have the moral authority, the absolute, incontrovertible, objective moral authority that derives from a belief in God, as it is metastasized or expressed through religious theology, if you don't have any of that, that is absolutely necessary so as to ensure that people do not obey their own subjective conscience, so that they don't follow their own subjective, personal, bestial predilections, right, in contravention, in derogation of the moral laws of the universe. And that's why God is important, and that's why the laws of God, as expressed through the credo of the Catholic faith, or the Christian church, whatever it happens to be, right? The Jewish Torah, the Talmud, right? Talmud and Torah don't say anything about God, right? It's all about living a good life, okay? Which actually, to my my own intellectual sensibilities is far more appealing, right? If anything, I'd be a Jew. I wouldn't be a Catholic anymore, right? It's a dialectical tradition. That's what a lot of Jews don't understand that, right? Because they don't apply that critical analysis themselves to Israel, anyways. Which, by the way, well, we can get into that discussion another day. But back to the topic at hand. Why? So the point I'm trying to make, in a very, admittedly, rather convoluted way. The point I'm trying to make is that conservatives presuppose the essential, indispensable nature of God, because God, from God derives morality. Without God, we wouldn't know what is right and what is wrong, because we are just savages, we are just brutes, we are just instinctive, impulsive, impetuous creatures, and we're going to go out there and we're going to savage and brutalize everybody we can find if we have the power to do so. Thucydides, a great author, a great man, a great general, a great philosopher. Actually, one of my favorite authors of all time. Okay, he's a Greek, ancient Greek, and he wrote about the Peloponnesian Wars, the wars between ancient Sparta and ancient Athens. I liked ancient Sparta better because they were oligarchs and they were aristocrats and they were badasses, and they were the Delta Force and the I don't know, the Army range. No, they were more hardcore than the Rangers. They were the Navy SEALs in the ancient world. Thucydides comes along and he says, he's a very great quote. He's got all kinds of quotes. He's like Dostoevsky in that regard. He says the strong did what they could. The weak suffer what they must. The strong do what they can. The weak suffer what they must. Now, I think if you're a conservative in the era of the 19th century, the early 19th century that we're talking about, you would actually embrace that principle. You'd have to. You'd have to. Why am I saying by implication you'd have to embrace that principle if you're a conservative? What is Thucydides? What's the point that Thucydides is making? Thucydides wrote a book called he said, what was the title of it? The title was the Peloponnesian War, but the subtitle of it was Power, Justice, and Human Nature. Okay, so he's talking about power, justice, and human nature. And Thucydides is making the overall thesis. I mean, he makes this very elaborately and very eloquently, but his fundamental thesis is that by having power, you have the capacity to assert what you believe is right. Okay, and without power, there can be no justice. And you just have to hope and assume that the people who are going to have power are also going to be, concerned with justice and the promulgation of just laws and the enforcement of just code. That's not always true, right? But it presupposes that in order to have order, any form of order, you have to have power. And in order to have power, you have to overcome your adversary, right? You have to have the power to actually instrumentalize that form of justice. And he's saying the weak have to suffer whatever they must, right? So he's basically saying, I mean, this is just a reformulation of the state of nature, right? The Hobbesian, Darwinian state of nature, whereby the strong gorilla, right, the silverback gorilla, right? Because I can go to the Detroit Zoo and I can see the silverback gorilla. And I was there a couple of months ago with my girlfriend's daughter, and we had a great time there. And we watched the silverback gorilla, and he was thumping his chest, and he was throwing feces on the other guys, right? And he was going to beat this other gorilla down, right? And because he's strong, because he's hella strong, right? I don't know how much a gorilla can bench press, but a lot more than me, even when I was strong, right? Even when I was a lot stronger than I am now, which is saying a lot, okay? So that's conservatism. What sort of institutions might be associated with a conservative sort of philosophy? Monarchy, aristocracy, the church. Why is the church associated with conservatism? The church maintains traditions. I mean, one of the most conservative institutions in the world right now is the Catholic Church. The Catholic Church, the Mass, it's been revised since Vatican II a great deal, and a lot of people rejected that, right? And then, what's his name? Not Benedict, the other guy. The guy that's over there right now, Francis, has gone in there and he's changed a lot of the religious vernacular and the things that you say in Mass. I just had a Mass that I had to go to a few weeks ago. I told you guys about that. It was a stupid wedding. And I didn't even know the words anymore because it's been so long that I've been out of church, and the Catholic Church has changed what they've said. But a lot of things don't change, okay? A lot of things are still the same, right? If you're a priest, you can't marry, right? Only men can be priests, okay? There's a rigid hierarchy, right? These sort of things harken back to the original foundational traditions of the Catholic Church almost 2,000, more than 2,000 years ago now, about 2,000 years ago, right? After the death and crucifixion of Christ, right? So that's conservatism. What else? The conservative ideology says that liberals are trying to have it both ways, okay? Because they're being paradoxical, they're being hypocritical. Because the real reason why liberal progressives of this era want to have a radical revolution, right? To overthrow the capitulation of old aristocratic authority and power, right? The real reason they want to do that is not because they want to liberate the sans culotte, right? The Walmart shoppers, the guys who live in trailer parks, the people who can't afford nice pants, right? They don't care about those people, right? That's just it's a false pretense. It's a pretext, right? It's all pretextual, right? The real incipient underlying motivation is one far more self-serving. And what that motivation really is, so contend the conservatives, so assert the conservatives, is that the progressives who control the ideology of the revolution, the lawyers and the bourgeoisie, the people who've got a lot of money, the city dwellers, right, the merchants and things, right, the upper middle class, okay, and the military officers, right. Those people merely want to confer absolute authority unto themselves. And they know the best, most effective, and efficacious way of doing so is to rile up the masses, to provoke the revolutionary sentiment, and to overthrow the monarchy. And in its place, there will be a power vacuum, and up arises and ascends to power the lawyers and the merchants and the military officers. And they empower themselves by virtue of the radical revolution which they helped instrumentalize. Is that true? Yes. Yeah, it is true. But just because it's true doesn't mean it's wrong. Think about that. If one of the incidental corollary effects of having a revolution is that certain people who otherwise wouldn't have power are empowered, is that in and of itself such a horrible thing? You're going to say, well, somebody's got to have, so there's got to be a change of power, right? It can't be a continuation of the status quo. The homeostasis, that would mean the king continues to be the king. Somebody's got to have the power. The power is going to be delegated, and the power is it's parcellated out, right? It's dispersed, it's diffused, right, amongst many people, as opposed to concentrated in one single individual. So yes, certain people, right, the Robespierres, if you will, right, the lawyers, the brilliant lawyers, and the successful merchants, and yes, some very important military officers like Napoleon, because that's what he was. He was a military officer, an artillery officer. Oh, those guys they're gonna have a meteoric rise, and they're gonna ascend to the top. And so the conservatives therefore debase the progressive tradition, or I can't say that's an oxymoron, the progressive ethos, by asserting that it's all disingenuous, right? These are just a bunch of cynical douchebags that are trying to really usurp power unto themselves, right? And they're just trying to bamboozle the people into thinking that this is just good for all the people, when in actuality, it's really, really, really good for these guys, right? The lawyers, the merchants, the military officers. It's more good for them than it is for the rest of the people. Now, can you say that just because it's more good for them, that therefore it's not good for the rest of the people? No, you can't say that, because that's not the same thing as saying it's just more good for them. So I want you to understand that there are arguments for and against this, right? I want you to be able to make them as well as I can make them. Now, you guys got an easier job because you guys just have to listen to what I'm saying and just reformulate this in your own words. I don't think it's too difficult. I'm doing a shit job at keeping this under an hour and a half or whatever, right? I'm doing a really horrible job at that. And I'm sorry. One of these, I don't know what I'm gonna have to do. I'm gonna have to start paying you guys money or something to listen to me. Hopefully, it doesn't come to that, right? But for those of you who don't think, for those of you who don't think you're getting your dollars worth, right? Your tuition dollars worth, you're wrong about that. You're getting more than your tuition dollar worth, because we're not having breaks that interpose on this lecture, right? So you're getting an hour and 53 minutes, 100%, 100 proof of lecture. Okay. Now, I fully concede that I spent the first literally half an hour just talking about the test, but that was important. Okay. It was important for those who did well, so as to continue to maintain that status quo, and it was important for those who didn't do so well, so as to encourage and to motivate and inspire them to do better. Right. That's why it's important. One last point, and I'm going to let you guys. Well, you guys, I'm not going to let you go because you're not a captive audience. You guys can go whenever you want. I'm going to ask these questions. Right? I got a couple of questions here, and these may foreshadow or anticipate questions that will come up in the exam. Does conservatism make a valid argument and present a viable geopolitical policy schematic for maintaining peace and order? It does if you assume, let's say arguendo, right, that people are bestial and primal and instinctual and impulsive and impetuous, and that they need the authority of the king, which derives from the power of God, and therefore there needs to be a hierarchy, there needs to be a structure, there needs to be order, there needs to be justice, there needs to be power, because if there is not those things, then we would descend into an anarchical state, and that is worse. That is worse than a state of order. At least we have at least we have order. We may not have perfect justice, but at least we have order. So say the conservatives. And you could apply that to, I mean, the example that I always give is Africa, right? Look at Africa, pre-colonial Africa and post-colonial Africa, right? The Africa that was under the rule of the British, and then after the British left, it all fell apart, and it degenerated into civil war and chaos and failed states. Of course, that happened because the British were unequal and inequitable in their rule, but nevertheless, that's what happened, right? And many people, even Africans, say it was better before the British left, because even though there wasn't justice, there was apartheid, right? There was segregation. At least there was order. True, there was order. Is order better than justice? This goes back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I'm going to talk about Maslow next time. So that's my answer to that. Think about the Congress of Vienna. What modern day institutions represent conservative ideology, and how is this manifested in their policy or platforms? These are stupid questions. I wrote these questions 5 or 6 years ago when I was not as smart as I am now. I don't like those questions, actually. So because I don't like them, I'm not going to answer them. Well, no, I shouldn't say that. The conservative institutions. Okay, I want myself to answer that, right? The church, how about that, right? The church is a conservative institution, right? The Republican Party is a conservative institution, right? With to maintain certain traditions, right? God, country, family, patriotic allegiance to the United States, right? Those things, okay? I am infringing upon your time, guys. I'm sorry. I know this went over. I apologize. I don't know. Next time, somebody needs to dare me to wear a Sasquatch suit, okay? Because thus far, nobody's actually called me out and said, Jeff, we don't believe that you actually have a military uniform from military school. Somebody actually called me out. I would actually feel as though the imposition, the obligation is on me for me to come down here and actually wear that uniform. Hence, I'm actually wearing half of it right now, but I'm not fully hardcore yet wearing the 100% of it. So if somebody actually said, Jeff, we don't believe, we think you're a punk. We think you're, whatever. You're a wimp. You're not going to come down there. You're not going to wear the Chewbacca hat, right? Or the Chewbacca face mask. Maybe I will. Maybe I will. Dare me. Okay. Truth or dare, right? All right. I'm playing around with you guys. Well, maybe not. Right? Call me out. See what happens. I hope you guys learned something today, and I really do hope you take what I said about the test to heart, because it's from the heart, right? It's meaningful. Have a great day. Have a great week. I'll talk to you guys next time.